Welcome back to EpistemiX. We're back with Sheikh Asif. How are you?
I'm alright. How you doing?
Assalamu alaikum. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you.
You too.
And let's get into this, Brother Asif, Sheikh Asif. We talked about the Quran. What is the Quran? We spoke about the miracles of the Quran in the last episode. Some of them, and we'll definitely do more episodes discussing more miracles of the Quran as well. But we gave enough food for thought to people. In this particular episode, I want to talk about the message of the Quran, which is probably the most important thing, right? And also, you left off, or you mentioned in the last episode, you said, or you referred to one of the miracles as the message of the Quran itself, sure. Right? Now, let's maybe start there. So, what do you mean by the message of the Quran is a miracle? And I think that will lead us into the message itself nicely.
Sure. In philosophy or in religious studies or even in history as well, they have something called the philosopher king. So there's this theory called the philosopher king, where someone philosophizes something, but then they're able to see those things implemented in their life. And there's very, very few people in history who are able to do that. I'll give you an example of someone who wasn't able to do this, like Karl Marx. He had a particular theory, a particular idea, but in his own lifetime, he didn't see the fruition, if that's the correct way of saying the word, of socialism in his lifetime. Yes. So this is actually something really incredible about Islam, and in actual fact, many of the prophets of the past they weren't able to see those things that they really dreamed of and really wanted in their own lifetime. So this is actually something which is quite unique about the Quran or the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And because of this, there is actually many things that actually happened that are mentioned in the Quran that are very transformative by nature. Okay. The fact that, as an example, the 23-year period that the Prophet Muhammad was a prophet, he was able to actually spread the message as far as Arabia, and then the leader or the one who took over him, Abu Bakr, and then after him was another caliph called Umar. The Islamic Empire rapidly expanded. Yes. Right. So there's something. It's not just about conquering a nation. Yeah. Right. It's not. Islam didn't just become widespread simply because another nation was conquered. Because what is really beautiful about Islam is that it allows other faiths to practice their religion. Yes. This is the reason why there's Jews and Christians in certain Muslim countries that were there from the time of the Prophet.
Absolutely.
Or should I say after the time, like a century within the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, passing away. So there's something really incredible about so many people becoming Muslims, or the message, or the power of the message, from a number of reasons. And this is basically the summary of the Quran. There's actually a chapter of the Quran that I want all the audience, everyone who's watching this video, to at least read. And it only takes like about 1 minute. Okay. Right? And that is the introduction of the Quran, or the opening chapter of the Quran, which is called Al-Fatiha, or the opening. And what it basically does, it summarizes the whole message of the Quran. And maybe when you're reading it, you may not think so deeply about it, but when someone actually goes and learns a little bit about this chapter, they'll find how this is a summary of the Quran and the main message of the Quran. Yeah,
that's powerful.
It's really incredible. And I actually know people who've actually really thought about being Muslims as a result of just reading this. There was this one Australian lady, she was, she did a lot of research into different religions, and she came and when she went to spend some time with some Tibetan monks, and she was interested in Buddhism. She thought Buddhism was a nice religion, but she said it's not for everyone. And this is a really beautiful thing about Islam, is that Islam is relevant to every single person. Yes. Right? Some religions are not like that. Yeah. She went to India, and she said that she was given out. She was handed out. She was given some flyers. And there was like a Quran workshop. And when she went to this Quran workshop, these non-Muslims, loads of non-Muslims were invited, and they were basically simply asked just to read some verses of the Quran. And she did that, and she was just so mesmerized and so amazed by this that she ended up becoming a Muslim.
That's amazing.
And one of the things that really made her think was this opening chapter, Surah Al-Fatiha. And this is mainly the essence of the entire Quran, which can be summarized in 3 main points. The first point is that it talks about Allah. It talks about God. Who is God? And we actually know many attributes, many of his names through the Quran. The second thing is about worship. What does God want from us? Once we know who our creator is, once we know who the creator of the universe and the world and everything that we see around us, then what is it that he wants from us? So this actually answers that really important question of the purpose of life and the purpose of existence. Then the final thing that it fundamentally talks about is the different stories of those who were guided and those who were misguided, and the reasons why they were misguided, and so on and so forth. This is from one perspective, but in terms of the actual laws of Islam as well, that's a whole load of, that's another dimension. Like there's certain things in the Quran which are so incredible in terms of its laws that they were an inspiration for many scientists like what's his name? Al-Haythami, I think is the I've forgotten his name now, but they call him the father of science.
Ibn al-Haytham.
Ibn al-Haytham, sorry, how did I forget that? And he was inspired by the Quran. And Khawarizmi, know the word Khawarizm is actually translated as algebra. And the reason why he came up with the idea of algebra, algorithm, is taken from the word algebra or Khawarizm. He was inspired by this because of he thought that the laws of inheritance in the Quran seemed to be a little bit complicated, so he actually came up with the idea of algebra or algorithm.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
So we have this incredible scientific, literary and scientific revolution taking place as a result of the Quran.
It's so many points we could bounce off from here, and I think few things I want us to really go into is, number one, going back to the point you made about the opening chapter of the Quran. Now, something very interesting, I think it was Hamiduddin Farahi who said in his introduction to this tafsir, which I don't believe he finished, he started to write
explanation of the Quran.
He had an introductory book for that, and I was going through that, and he made a very profound point. He said that the verses of the Quran, the verses of the Quran are such that they speak directly to the fitrah, which is the nature of the human being. And he said every single verse. Some you can't appreciate straight away, like verses on law and certain rulings, because of your conditioning.
Sure.
And over time that changes, right? But there are some verses which you will appreciate straight away. Now what's interesting about the very opening of the Quran is that the verses in the opening chapter of the Quran are verses which almost speak directly to the human nature, the human soul, right? So for example, the very first verse, when God says, all perfect thanks and praise belongs to God, right? Gratitude is something every single human being intrinsically understands that they have to give. So when someone does something good to you, you always say thank you, right? You can't, it's to the point where gratitude is used as a treatment for patients suffering from mental illnesses and depression and anxiety. They're given different protocols. So sometimes they tell them to practice gratitude morning and evening, morning, afternoon and evening. And after a few days and weeks, they start to improve.
Sure.
Right? So we understand the need to give thanks as a human being. It's almost an innate need to do that. But the human being always realizes that I'm thanking people, they're doing this X, Y, and Z for me. But there is ultimate thanks that's due.
Sure.
There's this recognition that most people realize, right? But so those type of people, when they read the first verse, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, all perfect thanks and praise belongs to God, it almost acts as I know this already. It makes sense, right? And that's the case with every single verse of the at least the opening chapter of the Quran.
Well, actually, what's interesting also from a linguistic perspective, because it's all tied in, is that the word for praise and thanks is what? What is it in Arabic?
Praise and thanks? Hamd.
Hamd, right? So in the Arabic language, and it's not just necessarily the Arabic language, any language, there's 3 main parts where sound emanates from our mouths. The first is the throat.
Okay.
The second is the inside of our mouth. And the third is our lips. So the word hamd, which means praise and thanks, they reflect those 3 parts of our mouth.
Wow.
The ha, which is from the throat. The m, which is from the lips, and the which is the inside of the mouth.
Wow.
So when you're actually saying that all praise and thanks belongs to God, it's like it's reflected from a linguistic perspective
And
that every element
wow.
of our mouth from A to Z
yeah,
is there to praise God.
that's mind blowing. And that's one of the powers, I guess, one of the wisdoms that God revealed that Quran in Arabic.
Yeah.
Right? And this, I mentioned this in one of the previous podcasts or shows when we were talking about the sort of absurdity of life on atheism. We know there's a verse where Allah says that those that turn away from His remembrance will have a very difficult, constricted life.
Sure.
Allah says, "Ma'ishatan dhanka."
Dunka.
Now, when you say the word dhanka, when you even say it, it's like dhank.
Yeah.
It's like the back of your throat closes
Yeah.
off. There's this
Yeah.
constriction, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah.
the meaning is that it's like a narrowing, it's a tightening, it's a squeezing, right?
Yeah.
Just the way even the sound of the words
Yeah,
as they emanate from your vocal cords, the way they come, it adds to the meaning. That's something amazing about the Arabic.
Yeah, and books have been written on this.
Yeah.
The actual the way that that the sound of something
Yeah.
is connected to its meaning.
Wow.
And that's one example. I mean, for instance, the word hub.
Yeah.
Hub in the Arabic language means
Love.
love.
Yeah.
So the one of the letters which is closest to our heart is the letter ha, which
Yeah.
is from our throat.
It comes from deep.
Yeah,
your
right,
eyes, doesn't it?
right at the bottom of
Yeah.
the throat. And the word which is furthest away from our heart
Yeah.
is the letter ba, because it's on our lips.
Yes.
So it's basically you're trying to take out the love that you have in your heart and you want to show it to the person that you
Wow.
love, and it's basically out in the
That's
outer realm.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's so
So
profound.
Ibn Taymiyyah, he's one of the scholars who died around the 15th century.
Yeah.
He's got he's written extensively about this, as are many scholars
That's
have talked
just.
about this.
But I think this is a whole different video, an episode.
Yeah,
We'll definitely go into
absolutely,
this. I think
sure,
because
sure.
some people really appreciate those that are sort of fascinated by linguistics and things like this, or maybe an episode on the wisdoms of the Quran
Sure.
being revealed in Arabic.
Yeah.
But going back to the point, so what we're saying is that the message of the Quran is
Yeah.
a miracle, and the message of the Quran is relevant, it's timeless,
Yes.
right? Now, and I know we can look at the message of the Quran from different angles, rulings, laws, X, Y, and Z, but let's just focus on the sort of core fundamental message.
Sure.
What is the most fundamental message of the Quran? Which is to do with our purpose. What does God tell us what our purpose is in the Quran?
So the most fundamental or the most important message, I mean, if there's nothing that you know about the Quran,
Yeah.
then if there's one thing that you could say is the element or the message of monotheism, which is translated in Arabic as Tawheed.
Yeah.
And that is to recognize that once you recognize that there is existence of God, and I'm sure that you've discussed
Yes.
this in a previous video, or you're going to discuss
We'll
it
probably
later on.
we'll probably do it at some point.
And in actual fact, this what's interesting is that the Quran, it doesn't really it doesn't mention atheism that much, which is quite interesting.
Yes.
Because one of the reasons is because the concept of the existence of a supreme being
Yeah.
is something which is innate within us,
Yes.
right? Is something which is we're naturally inclined towards that. If we're on we're in a plane and it's about to crash, then even if we don't believe in God,
Yeah.
we will call upon
We're gonna
a
call out to
supreme
God,
one.
yeah.
It's part of our nature.
Yes.
And it's not something that necessarily has to be taught. It's just something within us.
Yeah.
So once we recognize this, then we have to recognize there can only be one God.
Yes.
Right? Because there can't be two gods. So-
Yeah.
and God actually mentions this in the Quran, that if there were more than one God, then
Yeah.
there would be
Chaos. Everything would be
chaos.
destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah. So for instance, if I said, okay, Imran, God A says that you have to die
Yeah.
at 8:13
God
in the
forbid.
evening.
Yeah.
God forbid. And then God B says, no, I want him alive.
Yeah.
If you're alive, that means God is more powerful.
He is the God then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if there's something which is 50% power,
Then none of them are powerful.
yeah, exactly.
It just doesn't make sense.
They
right?
cancel each other out.
Yeah.
So there has this idea of if someone does every single aspect of Islam,
Yeah.
the laws, they follow it every single aspect of Islam, but they don't follow this one aspect of Tawheed or monotheism, the idea that
Yeah.
that we should only worship one God.
Yeah.
Then all of those things that we do,
Yeah.
they're just for nothing, because
Yeah.
this is the most fundamental thing.
And you bring the point now, which I think is good to move on to as we wrap up slowly, which is worship, right? First point of call is understanding that God is uniquely one.
Sure.
And I think let's clarify that point, because we normally in the English language refer to Islam, Christianity, Judaism as monotheistic religions. But we know the conception of monotheism in Christianity and Judaism is not exactly the same as the understanding of Allah's oneness in Islam. So let's go straight to the 112th chapter. Allah says He's Ahad. What does this mean? Can you give us a bit more of just flush this point out a bit?
Sure. So this chapter was revealed because the disbelievers, they asked the Prophet, what's a genealogy, the family tree of God, and this chapter was revealed, and it's only that 3 or 4 verses.
Yes.
So the first chapter says, "Qul huwallahu ahad." Say, O Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, say to the people that God is ahad. And the word ahad basically means unique. And there is something which is really important, and that is that every single thing that God mentions about himself, although they may seem to have similarities between us and human beings and the creation, but they're completely unique to God. So for instance, if we say that God is the most knowledgeable or the knowledgeable, he calls himself Al-Alim, which means the knowledgeable. It means that his knowledge goes way beyond what the creation does.
Yes.
So he's all hearing, all seeing. He says this quite often in the Quran. So when we hear something, when we see something, it's very limited in what we can see, what we can hear. But with God, it's actually maximally perfect, I think the term is, which means that it surpasses anything that the creation can do.
Yes.
So the actual the names or the descriptions may be similar in terms of the creation. That creation has knowledge, I have knowledge, you have knowledge, you can see, I can see. But when God describes himself as using those words, it has a completely different reality.
Yes. So it's just in the use of word.
Absolutely.
As far as its reality, it's totally different.
Yeah.
Right? And we don't say someone is as loving as God, or God is as loving as someone, right?
Sure.
Because there's that separation right there. So we know God is uniquely one. He's one alone. He's not divided into parts or bits or anything like this.
Sure.
Again, this concept is very intuitive. One all-powerful creator who's unlike anything you can imagine, right? God tells us, and the entire Quran, the message of the Quran revolves around this fundamental point, which is that he created us to worship him.
Yeah.
Right? This is the purpose of life for human beings, right? Now, before I get you to explain what worship means from an Islamic perspective, I think it's important to understand is that every single human being is looking for purpose. You can't escape this. I mentioned this in a previous video, is that even the most staunchest of naturalists and atheists, they would understand that if their worldview meant that life had no meaning or purpose, it was all just a random accident, right? Yeah. And if that was the case, then they should have just given up, right? They should have just been nihilists and acknowledged that. But still, there was individuals amongst them, many that said, no, there isn't any meaning or purpose, but we're going to still keep looking for meaning and purpose, right? Sure. And there's this absurdist view on life. Looking for purpose and meaning is intrinsic to the human condition, right? People will end up looking for what their purpose is, and also worshipping and submitting, I would say, is also intrinsic to the human being, because people end up worshipping and submitting to everything, right? Yeah. Or anything, it could be money, it could be people, it could be cars, it could be systems, it could be ideologies, X, Y, and Z, right? So we know we have a intrinsic need for these things. Islam, God in the Quran tells us this. He provides us the answer, that fundamental answer to the fundamental question human beings have asked for, which is, what's your purpose? God tells us he created us for no other reason except to worship him. What does that mean? Because some people may take that as, why should I just, they may think worship means prayer. I'm going to pray all day long. Why should I do that? Why should I just waste, my life doing that and do nothing else? What does worship mean in Islam? In
actual fact, what you said, that where we submit or our purpose in life, the purpose of human beings is to worship God.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, when we have religions, they tend to be named after particular figures.
Yes.
Of that particular religion. So, for Christianity is named after Christ, Jesus Christ. Hinduism is based, I think,
the region. I think
is a region.
The Hind region. Yeah. As far as I know,
like Buddhism is named after Buddha as an example. But we're not considered to be Mohammedans, and Orientalists like to call us.
They wanted to call us that. they
we're
did
not
call
Mohammedans.
us that.
We don't worship the Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings. We actually obey him in terms of he is showing us the guidance and the right way how to do things. But we don't worship him, and we love him and we adore him, but we don't worship him.
Yes.
The only one that we worship is God. But Islam, in actual fact, the word Islam means to submit to the will of God.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's actually something which is named after our functional role, or the reason why we were actually created.
Wow.
And it's actually, when we're saying that we're Muslim, what we're saying is that we are submitting to God. We are trying to fulfill our purpose in life. But what does this mean? This means that worship is basically where we submit our will to God in all aspects of our life, whether we are doing it indirectly or directly. Directly in terms of that when we pray, when we are doing pilgrimage, we're not doing it for fame, we're not doing it for any other reason except to please and to thank God. And in terms of indirectly, is that there's different systems within Islam. I'm not sure systems is the right word, but different ways of how we interact with one another in terms of marriage and divorce, in terms of how we deal with one another financially, every aspect of life, indirectly, the way that we're dealing with one another, that can also be a form of worship. Because someone may actually say, how is it possible that I can fulfill my purpose in life? Because I can't be praying for, like 24 hours a day. But the point is that as long as you follow the precepts of Islam in every aspect of our life, even the way that, we deal with one another, how we deal with our wives, how the wives are dealing with their husbands, when we're actually doing that with the intent of pleasing God, then that actually becomes a form of worship as well.
Right. So what you're saying is that basically your entire life could be a form of worship if done with the right intention and in accordance with what God has told us to do, basically.
Yeah. And to be honest, when you were talking about arrogance earlier, I'm not sure whether this is going to be too philosophical or whether you're going to be discussing
That's
this.
fine. If you get as philosophical as you like, bro, it's not a problem.
At a later video or clip. Is that why do we do things? So I'll give you one example. If you take God and the concept of paradise and hellfire out of the equation, why do we do things?
Yes.
Why do we? One example is charity, right? When I'm giving charity to someone, and you take out God and the hereafter out of the equation, why are you doing it? Because maybe you're doing it because you feel guilty. That's in one example. We may give charity because out of guilt. Or another reason why we may give charity is because it makes us feel good. So you're not doing it for that person, or you're not doing it for a higher purpose to please God. So if you're doing it just for that feeling of guilt or just of that feeling of making yourself feel good, then that's not real morality. Because that doesn't judge whether you are doing something for the right reason. In actual fact, there's so many other things that we could do which are morally wrong, universally morally wrong, and it makes us feel good. Or it may make us feel as though we're trying to keep away from not doing something out of guilt, right? We're doing it out of guilt, sorry. So if you actually take that out of the equation, then that's actually a really dangerous proposition of why we are doing something. So when you're actually doing something for the sake of God or doing it for paradise or keep away from hellfire, then that gives you a much higher purpose. And you're not doing it because of your own arrogance or your own ego. You're doing it outside of your own state, effectively.
Absolutely, bro. And I think that I think summarizes what we need to get across here. It's been brilliant, bro. I think we've hit some very important points. I think just to summarize, I think at the end of the day, we can sit here and we can articulate the case for the Quran and Islam till the cows come home, right? At the end of the day, as we know, guidance comes from God. But one thing I think we need to end on, and one thing maybe you'd agree with, which is at the end of the day, Islam is very experiential, right? Is that you look at God's giving you enough proofs and evidences. Take that first step with humility. As soon as you enter the door, then you will start to see signs and proofs which will really just strengthen your faith further and further and further, right? It's like, you can convince someone sugar is sweet, right? Rationally, you can convince them, and we can make a very strong rational case for the proof that the Quran is a miracle or that Islam is the truth, and we're going to continue to do that. We've done that in the previous episodes. But at the end of the day, you can convince someone rationally that sugar is sweet, going back to the example, but it's never going to be the same as until they were to taste sugar for themselves, and then they know sugar is sweet, right? Sure. So I think there's this experiential element as well, which people need to experience, right? And when they do that, and we know this from many examples, when people become Muslim, they may not be that firm in the beginning. Most people aren't, right? When I started practicing, I wasn't. Most people I know weren't. But over time, the closer they get to God, the closer they develop their relationship with God, the more they put into effect what God has told them to do, the clearer the reality of God becomes to them, right? And it's not just wishful thinking. God gives them signs. There are things that open up to you which you can't put into words, right? Anything you want to say on that, just to wrap up?
No, but what I did actually, I was thinking or reflecting upon when you were actually talking about this is that I'm not sure whether you read this. There was a really interesting article about this guy. I think it was in the Guardian newspaper, where there's one guy from Scotland.
Yeah.
He'd never met any Muslims, and he just came across like a copy of the Quran. He started reading it, and he ended up becoming Muslim.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, there's one guy when I was at university, I was studying Islamic studies at SOAS University, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And there was this one guy next to me called George. And then later on, I saw him in the prayer room, and I was thinking, oh my God, this guy is Muslim. And I asked him, I said, like, how did you become Muslim?
Wow.
He said, I just read the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Wow.
And that inspired him to become Muslim. So the thing is, it's really interesting that you don't necessarily have to be in contact to understand or realize the truthfulness of Islam.
Yes.
But once you are once you are actually in the contact of Muslims, I find that actually is a really strong way of increasing your faith in God and just being around that kind of environment.
Yes.
But what I would say is that I think it's really important just to be open-minded and just read the Quran.
Absolutely. And the way the message of Islam fulfills people is proof in and of itself. Because at the end of the day, what really matters is the way things impact us, right? Anyway, hopefully, that's been beneficial. Just thank you for coming again. It's been very, very beneficial the past 3 episodes. We'll do many more in the future. So hopefully, you guys have found this beneficial. If anyone's interested in learning more and reading more about the Quran, as Sheikh Asif has mentioned, pick up a good translation of the Quran, maybe one by Abdul Halim or the Clear Quran by Dr. Mustafa Khattab. Read it for yourself and just study it for yourself and see what you think. And make sure to subscribe and to click the notification bell. Until next time, take care.